No, hold on. This is 5 minutes funnier. Hi, before we get into this week's episode of 5 Minutes Funnier, I just want to do a little bit of an addendum to what I did the previous week about control freak in your head and audiences don't quite gel up with you when you're on stage. And I forgot really one critical thing when I talked about that. And the only reason I remembered it is because I did the first show I've done really in a couple of months. And I was a little bit slow on stage, trying to get my timing back. But it actually worked to my benefit because I did my very first joke, which was about the host and what have you. And I was just doing a little bit of a pause while I pulled up the next joke in my series. And the audience paused for a minute and then they laughed. And I realized that the person who was out of sync was not the audience, it was me. My timing was off. So the great thing about it is that I did adjust my timing. I had a great show, and I'm sitting here with egg on my face because I forgot to mention that in the last episode. But now you know. I'm Jimmy England for 5 Minutes Funnier, and I am going to try and help you today with some tips on how to deal with writer's block. But I am going to be frank with you. Whenever I present something on here, I feel very confident that I am giving you good information. But dealing with writer's block is really a psychological thing in some instances. It's deeper with some people than it is with others. So the idea that I can magically tell you what you need to do and so you can get back on that horse and start writing a ton of fabulously funny jokes probably won't happen. I will tell you what I do, give you some strategies that you could try. So let's talk about things you can do when you hit that writer's block wall. Well, tip number one, exactly like Mark Twain said, walk away from it for a while. It should come with a plan to return and stick to it. I mean, if you say, okay, today is Monday, I'm not going to write again until next Monday, don't write until next Monday. Now that doesn't mean you won't have funny thoughts, because there's something about having something denied to us that makes it so much more important to us. But I think it's important that you don't get up on your computer or into your workbook and you start writing away furiously because you think you've got something. Make notes of what you did. If you thought of a full form joke, yeah, jot it down someplace. Don't do it in your collected writings, but just somewhere where you know where it is. If it was just a concept or an idea, write it down. Yeah, something that you can go back to when the time is right. Another thing that I find is really useful for me is that I don't necessarily write for cohesion. In other words, I'm not writing a set in a particular order here. When I'm done, I'm going to step on stage and do it just like that. Sometimes you just got to settle for the fact that you're going to have a bunch of unrelated jokes, get them out, put them down. There you go. Then when you do kind of get stuck at that moment, you can go back in, look at the jokes, and figure out the order they should go in so they do have cohesion, so it does come together. That process for me is not just liberating, but it opens up my creativity a lot because all of a sudden I've got to do segues to get from this joke to this joke. And sometimes I find for the middle, a joke I hadn't thought of at all that is better than anything else I've written. Then there's the octopus. In this instance, it's having a pet is a pain in the ass. And as you can see, I've developed all the different things that I could relate to that particular subject. I'm not worried at this point about actually writing jokes about it. I'm just taking it in every single direction that I can think of. If I do think of a joke, I'll jot it down possibly, but what's more important at this moment is to develop this octopus of options. Because once you have that, then you can go back into it and say, okay, here, yeah, I can see a funny joke about this. Hey, by the way, that'll lead to this. Oh, we're in the vet's office now? Let's talk about vet fees. Let's talk about the hours. Let's talk about whether the vet is there or not. Let's talk about leaving your pet overnight. Let's talk about missing your pet. Well, you get what I'm saying. It leads to a lot of other things as a result. What you're writing should have a premise involved in it, and your premise should have an attitude. In my previous example, I don't like animals, clearly. So there is my attitude right there within my premise. If I'm writing and I'm having a hard time coming up with anything along that lines, then maybe I should go back and sharpen that premise up a little more. Maybe it's too broad. Maybe it needs to be more focused. And if you haven't set your premise, take a look at what you've written and try and figure out what your premise is. You should really begin with that anyways, but that's one way to approach it. And the last thing seems counterintuitive, but if something isn't working, your premise is not generating what you want, switch it up. Change the premise to the opposite of what you're doing. You like dogs. And then see if that, in turn, will generate new material, but in a different direction than you were going. Perhaps you're just going down an alley that you are not as enthusiastic as you thought about. Anyway, that's it for 5 Minutes Funnier, the comedy how-to. I am Jimmy England. As always, please subscribe to this channel and share us with your friends. It's a big help. In the meantime, stay funny, everybody.